So today we're going to be presenting adding whole numbers. So my name is Anita.
I'm Sophia.
My name is Alex.
And I'm Fatima. And then Common Core and Standard, we're going to be focusing on kindergarten. For any number from 1 to 9, find the number that makes 10 when add to the given number. By using object text or drawings, or record the answer with drawings or equations. Common misconceptions. So students might think that like 1.5, it's a wild number. So we're gonna take the time to explain to students that if it has a decimal, it's not a wild number. And when it doesn't have a decimal, it's a wild number. Students may want to count by tens instead of counting by ones. So when students are learning how to count by tens, they might get confused when they have to go back and count like by ones again. So we have to explain to students that they have to take the time to practice before assuming. Students may have a hard time identifying numbers, like wild numbers, like 10, 11, 13, and we go on. They might be saying like 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 3. So we can take the time to explain to students that when a number is together, it doesn't have a comma, it's a whole number. So maybe by practicing with students, they might be able to understand visually and be able to say it. Counting the same number again. So some students might have trouble by counting the same number again. For example, if they see 10, they might be saying 1 because they see the 1 in the front. Instead of saying the whole 10 number, they might just say 10. Or if they see 11 or maybe 13, instead of saying 13, they might say 3, the last number. When counting the final number will be the answer. So we're going to be explaining to students that when they're counting the examples, they're going to be getting M&Ms or cereal or toys, something that they're going to be able to see it. When they're counting them or drawing them, the number that they end up with, that's going to be the answer they're going to be using. So the mathematical practice that we're going to be using is make sense of problems and perspective and solving them, implement their plans and their problems. So teacher is going to explain to the whole class how they're going to be solving the problem, and then the student is going to have time to practice by themselves how to do it or practice with a group, model with mathematics. So student is going to be getting some toys, cereal, or M&Ms to show examples of how the number looks. So if they have a 2, they're going to be showing the group or the classroom how many M&Ms is a 2. So for example, if it's a 2, they're going to have to add 2 M&Ms instead of adding 3. They're going to talk it to the group and show the group what it's 2. Construct visible arguments and critiques the reasoning of others. So students are going to have time to talk to groups and show their work, talk about the different ideas they have to get where to have the final answer. Because students might have different visuals to see the answer, the end. So students are going to have time to practice and show either the teacher or the groups and how they got their work done.
So for day 1, we're going to start off by having our students practice with M&Ms and cereals. So that'll be their visual representation of the problem. So they're familiar with it. They're not just going to be looking at the numbers. So they're able to physically like feel it and be able to count along. So they're going to count them so they can receive like different quantities. So for the most part, they'll all receive the same amount. So they can receive like 5 M&Ms and they'll count them together as a class just to make sure that everyone's on track and familiar with counting. So that'll take place at the beginning of class and it'll be like 5 minutes. And then afterwards, we'll briefly ask students if they're familiar with adding, if they're ever heard of it, if they aren't familiar with it, just to kind of get an idea of where they're at when it comes to like standing with adding. Following that, for like about 10 minutes, our students will be given cereal and M&Ms. So this will be a way for them to be able to see it as well. Since they are in kindergarten, visuals will be a lot of help for them. So we could give them, for example, 3 cereal pieces and 3 M&Ms. So we'll start off by giving all students the same amount, and then we'll ask them to count the cereal pieces together. So we'll start off as a class just so that everyone is less intimidated by the work and so that they're not just doing it alone, and so they can have an idea and be familiar with it once they do end up moving on to working on it alone. So we'll count the cereal pieces together. So we'll have 3, and then we'll count the M&Ms together. So we'll have 3 M&Ms. And then as a class, we'll move on to counting all of the pieces together, which will then give us 6 pieces. And then at the end of class, we will practice as a class again. So pretty much day 1 is just going to be classwork so that everyone's familiar with it and they get practice. So then we'll start off by then doing different examples. So students will be able to say, add 2 M&Ms to the problem or add 3. So it's just like a different variety so that there's like different problems. And so that we can all work it out together, and this will eventually allow them to gain practice. So all of this is intended so that eventually they don't have to have the visuals, and then they can move on to just like non-physical representations, so they can have them on paper, and then eventually leading them to being able to work these problems without using any visuals at all. So this image here will kind of be an example of what we would do. So we'd have 3 M&Ms, and then we'd move on to like adding another 2 Cheerios, and then they would be able to add them together and see what it is that they solve and get as their answer.
Okay, for day 2, to start off with the warm-up, we're going to give them like about 5 minutes on this warm-up. It's basically what they did the day before. So we're just going to be explaining to the students what how to count to 1 through 5, just to refresh their minds. And we will be using cereals and M&Ms as again, just to cover that standard for the visualization part with the objects. But for today, we are going to also use worksheets to cover up the drawing part of that standard, and the students will be introduced to worksheets that will display images, which will be used as their visuals when adding. Students will start off by coloring in the worksheet, which will give them a little bit of something to work on, because as they are kindergarten and they'll get distracted by anything, and so coloring will help them to get more motivated counting wise and adding them. So as they're coloring like the first apple, we're going to say 1, and as well we could do it as a whole class or in their groups, and it will help them discuss within their groups how they're coloring and what they're coloring and how much they're adding as they're coloring. So they'll first color the first color in the worksheet, and then they'll move on to adding those images. So just depending on how much is on the worksheet itself, how much images they see, they'll be coloring and adding as they go along. And then just to promote their growth towards adding, at the end of the class, the students will get into groups and will attempt counting to 10 by helping each other out. For this, I think at least for the worksheet part, we're going to give them about like 10 minutes so they get a full concept of it. And then for the end, we'll then use to promote their counting to 10. At the end of the class, like I stated before, the students will receive worksheets like the one displayed on the left right here, and they will have the opportunity to attempt to work it out. Like we said, we just gave them up to 1 through 10, which they should know by now. So this is just like a little helping wise in that area where they could get a little experience on counting more than 10. Just if they get it wrong, that's fine. If they do it right, then that's help towards them and their growth on addition wise. But like I said, they won't do it on their own. Obviously, they're in groups, so they could have their group help them out, and they could go around stating and coloring as they go.
All right, and then for day 3, so students are going to come in. Personally, I like to spend like the first 5 minutes of the day just taking roll and actually seeing how students are doing, getting them kind of a little talkative and engaged so that they're ready to be active. I think it's really important that they are kind of comfortable and in the mood to participate with their groups and interact with the teachers so that they're actually thinking and engaged throughout the course, the coursework or the class schedule. And so on this day, right after that introduction, students are, they're going to be working within groups. So they will be on their own, or I'm sorry, before groups, they will be in groups eventually, but before they will be on their own solving addition problems, and they will show their work afterwards in small groups using visuals. This will be drawing shapes such as circles, squares, and triangles. They'll be using these shapes to explain themselves, and it's going to be a tool that they can use to show their reasoning and what they were thinking and how they went about their problem solving. And so it's important to have them do their individual work at first to see what they know and have them practice on their own and go through their struggle. And then also go into the group in order to kind of collaborate with others and see what everyone had thought. This way they can see what they thought in comparison to what others thought, and they can also learn from each other within these small groups. And then also during this time, both during their independent work and their group work, teachers will walk around and make sure students are basically on task and just working on something. Effort is always encouraged in the classroom. It doesn't matter if you have the right answer or not. The most important thing is that you actually take an attempt. So teachers will be monitoring the room and walking around, make sure that there's no pencils not moving, no blank papers. So we want to ensure that students are attempting the problems and just thinking and attempting something. And then after all of this, students will then be working as a whole classroom. So we will conclude as a whole class and solve problems together. So what this is going to look like is the teachers are going to come back to the front of the classroom and we'll be doing problems on the whiteboards. Us as teachers, we're going to present problems on the whiteboard, but then we're going to have the students solve them through participation. If students are kind of shy or they're just not feeling like participating that day, we can use things such as popsicle sticks or whatnot to call on students in order to give a shot at the problems that we have on the board. This is important because it'll give students a chance to kind of hear from other students that maybe they don't sit next to or they're not in small groups with. So this gives them a little bit more broad of a spectrum of how other students might think or how others just in general might think. So that's a good takeaway from that. And then students will problem solve using shapes to show their understanding. So within the small groups, I had already stated how they're going to use circles, triangles, and squares. They're going to draw those out and use those as their tools for reasoning and showing their thought processes. And then they're also going to do that up on the whiteboard. So when we do call on those students to participate, they're going to go ahead and come up and then they're going to actually write on the board using those tools. And then Anita, could you go back up to the mathematical practices? So right here, I just wanted to stress why these are so important. I know we went over them, but I also wanted to go over them after we had went through the lesson plan. So making sense of problems and persevering in problem solving. This is when students are they're learning to persevere through their problems. So as they're working on them, they learn to, just like as you're working out, you kind of build up endurance. And so with problem solving, the fact that these students are able to have their alone time and problem solve, it's going to increase their ability to stick with the problem and persevere until they solve it, or at least until they kind of come up with something, an attempt. And then same thing, model with mathematics to show their work. They're using the tools such as the shapes that they're drawing, and this is really good because they're learning how to use tools to explain themselves and to back up their arguments. And then constructive, viable arguments and critique of reasoning of others. So this is basically the small groups and also the group work that's being done on the board. It's very good that they're learning how to do this because, as it states right here, talk to group and explain your own work. They're learning how to communicate with others, and this is going to be important wherever they go in life, whether that be like within a job or even just within further group work as they get older and go through schooling. And unless anyone wants to add anything else, that's the lesson plan.